Tips of the Scale, episode 30.
Welcome to tipsofthescale.com, your home for weight loss motivation. Tune in every week for weight loss success stories from around the world and for expert tips on diet and exercise. And now, your host, Sam Lamelli.
Hey there, Scale Warriors, and thank you so much for joining me again for another episode of Tips of the Scale, your home for weight loss motivation. Are you on our email list? If not, you're missing out on your chance to be entered in some fun contests that are coming your way. Do you want to miss out? I didn't think so. Go to tipsofthescale.com/subscribe to sign up now. And if you enjoy this free podcast, please show your support by going to tipsofthescale.com and clicking on the subscribe in iTunes button at the top of our page. This will send you over to iTunes where you can leave a, hopefully, 5-star rating and review. To show my appreciation for your, hopefully, 5-star rating, I'll give you a shout out at the top of an upcoming show telling the world just how cool you are. All right, Scale Warriors, let's get started. I am thrilled to introduce my guest today, Miss Angela Stauffer from Denver, Colorado, here in the United States. Angela, how are you today?
Sam, I am doing terrific. Thanks for asking.
Awesome. That's great to hear. I'm really excited that you're here today. As you and I know, but I'm sharing with the listeners, we met at a conference in Colorado a couple months ago where we had the privilege to learn some really exciting new research in obesity and talk about some of the latest topics in health and fitness and social media. So I'm really, really excited that I got this time with you today to talk a little bit more about what you do for a living, because there are a lot of people who I think would benefit from hearing about what you do. So before we dive into that, if you would take a minute and tell us a little bit more about you so we can get to know you.
You bet. Thank you for that opportunity. I myself am a weight loss success story. So I know, Sam, that you are as well. We share that journey. I lost 60 pounds 12 years ago and had always struggled with my weight, with a very successful career in marketing and business development. And as a side interest, something fun to do, I worked with the Weight Watcher organization. I was there for 8 years, and it was work that I absolutely loved. But I saw the sad reality that only 5% of people keep that weight off. And that's what drove me to launch the company that I work for now, New Terrain. I want to be part of that 5% solution.
Wow, that is a very interesting statistic. If anybody hasn't heard that before, I know some people's eyes just bugged open right now at hearing that.
Yeah, as hard as we think losing weight is actually the easy part. Keeping it off is 10 times harder.
Yes. Absolutely. I agree completely. I think one of the things that we're on the same page about is that there are two entirely different processes, right? Weight loss is completely different from weight maintenance and the lifestyle change that happens after you've lost it. Yeah.
Right.
Very cool. Right. So that said, as you know, we like to kick off every episode with a motivational quote before we dive into the rest of the story here. So what do you have for us today, Angela?
You are the CEO of you.
I love it. You are the CEO of you. So tell us a little bit more about how that resonates for you and how you keep that in mind and how you apply that to your life.
When I think about a corporate CEO, their schedules get changed. They get pulled into meetings. The plan doesn't always go as it is on paper, yet they still have to steer the ship. If you're a public company, they report into Wall Street, right? And the same is true of life. It doesn't always go as planned, but you still have to steer the ship. And when you think about yourself as the CEO of you, no one else can hold that role. It's you. And that's an empowering thought. It helps to reframe those small daily decisions when you're thinking about you calling the shots.
For me personally, that really resonates in terms of intrinsic motivation, right? You can try to do things for your friends and your family or the reasons that society may want to see us be, at a more ideal weight. But if the motivation doesn't come from you as your own cheerleader, as the CEO who's in charge of your journey, like, you're going to fail somewhere along the way. So I love that you are in charge of the ship.
The other thing I like about it is that it humanizes the process.
Yes.
And so if you think about being a CEO, they're human. They're not perfect. They make mistakes, but they make the best decisions they can at the time. And they're able to adjust those decisions and adjust the plan. And the same is true with your weight loss effort. You make the best decisions you can at the time with the knowledge that you have. Sometimes they'll be successful, sometimes they won't, but you keep moving. You keep steering the ship.
I like it a lot. Very cool. Thank you for sharing that with us, Angela.
You are welcome.
So with that said, let's dive into what you do and how you got there. So what drew you into the health and fitness industry? I know you touched on being a success story on your own a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about how you got to where you are today.
really, it started as a side interest. And I was leading a Weight Watcher meeting. I had a full-time career. I led a Weight Watcher meeting one night a week. And every time my schedule got crazy and I had to let things go, push things off of my plate, that was the one thing I could never let go. And I assure you it wasn't the money, you know. It was just the most rewarding thing in my schedule. It was work that I truly loved. And so that was a message to me that there was something more there for me. And as I began to think about the industry and I began to watch what successful people were doing, I realized that there aren't enough people talking about the success, what makes people successful. So there are a lot of voices in the industry that tell us what to do. So there's weight loss plans galore. But there aren't a lot of people telling us how to get it done. Yeah. And so I like to think of myself as the how piece.
Very cool. I completely agree with your take on the imbalance of advice versus motivation and really diving into the nuts and bolts of how it gets done and helping people get there. Very cool.
Once you're living on the other side, it's hard to explain. You only hope that people can believe that it's achievable.
Yes.
I don't know that I knew what I was capable of. And so the initial motivation might be, I don't want to have to ask for a seatbelt extender when I travel.
Yeah.
But what you might not realize is that as an outcome of traveling more, you discover that you are an amazing photographer, and you begin to take these amazing, trips, photography trips. For me, it was running. So I had dabbled with running throughout my life and always carrying some extra weight. So even when I was running, I was carrying at least 30 pounds more than I should weigh. Once I achieved an ideal weight and I really began to focus on running, I discovered my capabilities and realized that I was actually a pretty fast runner and have run the Boston Marathon 3 times.
Very cool.
Never could have imagined that I would experience that honor. And so part of what drew me in is realizing that sometimes we just don't know what we're capable of, and it opens up a whole world of possibilities. Having good health really provides a framework to have a great life.
Absolutely. You just reminded me of a quote I read recently that if you believe a person can't have 2 different lives, talk to someone who's lost 100 pounds.
That's awesome.
It's such a dramatic change. It sounds like you've experienced that as well. And I'm sure you're seeing that in your clients as well.
Yeah, you bet.
So that's, I think, a good segue moving into what you do. So tell us a little bit about New Terrain and how it came to be and what you love about it.
So New Terrain offers 3 different lines of services. The benchmark, the cornerstone, are weight loss retreats. We conduct healthy living weight loss retreats in the Rocky Mountain region. We provide corporate wellness offerings for firms that are seeking to improve the health of their employees. And that's mostly the benchmark there is a series of lunch and learn. So lunch and learn series. We do a national diabetes prevention program. We do a walk-run program. We can do a corporate wellness retreat. So those kinds of things. And then as an outcome of those first 2, we work one-on-one with individuals that are striving to achieve a healthy weight.
Right on. So you have it sounds like to me, the awesome, unique position of being able to witness these firsthand shifts in both, physical transformation, but mindset of people who got there and, like you said, didn't believe the outcome was going to be achievable. But by the time they leave, I imagine there's a very different perspective. Would that be safe to say?
Absolutely. So our mission is that they come for a weekend and they leave with a plan.
So tell us a little bit about what you personally enjoy about what you do at New Terrain and what you're doing in this line of work.
I like watching people transform. So I love knowing that I'm making a difference. So for individuals, it's typically with weight loss. But if you roll that up on a larger scale, you're working in a field that impacts the well-being of our nation, of our world. And so that's pretty powerful stuff.
Very cool.
Yeah.
I know you're intimately familiar with the statistics on the direction that obesity is taken in the United States. So I know, or I've got to assume that you feel incredibly fulfilled by having a personal impact on the lives of people that are fighting that statistic.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's fun to watch people have success.
Yeah,
it's fun to watch them try new things and snowshoe for the first time or get on a horse for the first time. irreplaceable event.
Yeah, I love it. It's part of what I have personally found to be one of the most fulfilling parts of this show is I get to hear firsthand these wonderful stories of like the changing perspective and the new doors that open to people when they make this transformation, and just how enthusiastic and optimistic they are about the rest of their lives after this change.
Yeah, it is cool stuff.
So, Angela, you have a firsthand insight into a lot of these changes and these shifts in attitudes and perspectives from when people arrive to when they leave New Terrain. Now, what is something that you wish more people knew about diet and exercise in general?
I wish more people knew that small cumulative change is a lot more powerful than an on or off program.
Can you tell us a little more about that?
Sure. So if I think about all of the behaviors of a healthy person, right? So they're active a certain number of times per week, and they eat 5 or 6 fruits and vegetables per day, and they feel their feelings instead of eat their feelings, and they are well hydrated. You know, they get good sleep. So those are all behavior driven as opposed to program driven.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, if you were to try to do all of those at once, I'll use an analogy. If you've received a college education, right? If they gave to you on the very first day of class all of your assignments for all of your classes for all 4 years, you would be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
You would run off the campus. But that's what we do with weight loss programs. We give people everything at once. We say, oh my gosh, no sugar, drink water, you got to get active. We give them everything at once. And the reality is it's on or off.
Yeah.
Black or white. They're expected to be perfect. And so when you set up that framework where it's all or nothing, it's really hard to be successful.
Yeah.
Versus if we say, in the end, we don't care how long it takes. It could be a year, it could be 2 years, it could be 10 years. Mm-hmm. In the end, you'll be practicing all of these behaviors. And if you're practicing the behaviors of a healthy person, the scale catches up. I
agree completely. You actually touched on something that I really wanted to talk about today, and that was the different approaches to these programs. And I'm glad you mentioned this, that, you know, there's some personalities that can achieve that, right? The whole cold turkey approach, just hardcore from one day to the next, throw everything out, turn your life upside down and turn on this new lifestyle and can do it. But that is a very small segment of the population. And what I'm hearing you say is the majority of people kind of ease into it, and it's more of a transition of lifestyle as opposed to a light switch, right? Is that true? I would agree. The people that are successful in the long term. Mm-hmm. And so I like to think about slow success versus ambitious failure. I like that.
You know, right? And so over time, even now, so I've been at a healthy weight for 12 years. It doesn't mean that I don't continue to tweak dials and continue to improve my health in different ways. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I like that. The cumulative changes and the behavior-driven approach as opposed to an overwhelming program that's going to filter out people for the most part.
Yeah.
So you touched on some of the programs that are out there and how, you know, clearly they are not for everyone. So I want to talk about some of the contemporary wisdom or the fads that are out there that you hear frequently, and for you maybe are personally a pet peeve or something that drives you nuts that people believe that just isn't true. Do you have any of those?
Oh, I have a couple. My first one right now, and it's timely because we're approaching sugar season.
Yes.
Sugar season. I love when people tell me that they're addicted to sugar, that sugar is addictive. And you'll see a lot in the news right now because there's a lot of brain science. They're studying a lot of the neural pathways that sugar takes in the brain. And so there's a lot of research that's being done. Yeah. But when I think about addiction, there are two types of addiction. There's substance addiction and there's process addiction. And when I think about that, sugar, in my opinion, is an addictive process. The substance itself, I'm not sure, is addictive. And I think that that gets at an underlying behavior. So again, we're back to behavior.
Yeah.
But yeah, so when people tell me they're addicted to sugar, that implies an on-off, a black-white. And unlike a heroin addiction, I'm not certain that I believe people could avoid sugar 100% of the time for the rest of their life.
Yeah, I completely agree with that thought. That's true. And I mean, it's in fruits and it's in a lot of things that clearly are better balanced with like fiber and things like that as opposed to sugary drink or things like that. I want to step back to something you mentioned though, in that it's a process addiction. Can you expand on that a little bit? That's the first time I've heard that split out of process addiction as opposed to substance. That's really interesting.
Yeah. So people, I think, tend to think of sugar addiction when they think of being addicted to sugar as a substance addiction. And what I would like to contend is that it's a process addiction. So if I think about when people tend to eat a lot of sugar, it's emotional. It's not a physical hunger. It's not a substance addiction because they can put the sugar away. They can get off the sugar. A heroin addict can't get off the heroin, and then go back to it. Whereas with sugar, people will get off of it for a couple of days and then they'll go back to it. They'll binge on it.
Yeah.
And so I think sugar is providing something, providing an emotional relief or providing something. It's the process, how they use the sugar, that's addictive.
That's really interesting. You reminded me of something I've consistently heard in success stories, and that's that even though it felt like it was a physical addiction, because, clearly if you're used to a certain intake or a certain amount of grams of sugar a day, you're going to feel something in your body when that change happens. But there's also a consistent theme of those foods and drinks being the place they go to in times of like stress or extreme, emotional times and things like that. And I think what you're describing is exactly that, that's the process that they use to deal with something happening in their life at the time.
You bet.
That's right.
You touched on an interesting point too, Sam. What you're describing in terms of the taste of the sugar is what I would call the sweet palate.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I think about, our tongue has 10,000 taste buds, and sweet is one of the tastes.
Yeah.
And the average American consumes 22 teaspoons of sugar each day.
Yeah.
Well, that being the case, we have adjusted our palate to that amount of sugar. But it is possible to change your palate, to shift your palate. And so just dialing back the amount of sugar, things will end up tasting sweeter than they do today.
Yeah, that's so true. I've heard that often too. If folks stop consuming artificial sugars, for example, and having an apple or berries or something that's naturally sweet, and that when they go back to having that, the Dr. Pepper or the Coca-Cola or the thing that has the artificial sugars, it tastes twice sweeter than it did the last time that they had it.
Absolutely. It happens over time.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't happen overnight. It happens over time because we've trained our palate to be accustomed to a certain way of eating.
Yeah. So that's, I think, a topic we could talk about for a while. So you mentioned there are other fads or programs or myths in the industry that are some of these pet peeves for you. What's another one that we can discuss today that for you personally is misinformation that you'd like to help clear up today?
This will encompass a big bucket. Any eating philosophy that cuts out an entire food group is a pet peeve of mine. So I do believe that our bodies are each, a unique chemistry, and that each person personally will feel better with a certain percentage or a certain ratio of macronutrients. So you might prefer a slightly higher ratio of protein over carbohydrates, or I might prefer a certain, higher ratio of carbohydrates over proteins, or, everyone's body has a unique preference.
Yeah.
And that's part of being the CEO is you get to figure that out and choose your philosophy of eating. But food groups have nutrients. And so I think the danger is in that all of these eating plans that hit the market, when they eliminate a food group, they forget to tell people that they're eliminating nutrients.
That's really interesting. So what I'm hearing also is that if someone is going down that path, they probably, and you tell me if I'm way off on here, but if someone is, for example, cutting out carbohydrates completely, they're missing out on all those vital nutrients and are probably going to have to supplement to make up for what they're losing by cutting out that whole macronutrient bucket. Would that be true?
Yeah, that would be true. Yeah. That would be true. And often I think that is, if I think about the scale of good health, right? On the left-hand side of the scale, there's a junk food junkie. And on the right-hand side of the scale, there's a raw food vegan. There's a lot of landscape in between.
Yeah.
And a lot of different ways of figuring out what to eat. But when you're on that left-hand side of the scale and you're struggling with your eating and your weight, it's really hard to hear what your body is responding to. If someone had asked me when I was 60 pounds overweight if I preferred more protein or more carbohydrates, of course I would have said carbohydrates, because I like cookies and brownies and cake. But I'm not sure that I would have been able to really answer that question until I became very in touch with my body and how it responded to different food groups. And so all of what those programs all have in common is that whenever you cut out an entire group of nutrients, an entire food group, you are also cutting out calories.
Yeah.
And so, of course, they're all successful. And so I wouldn't argue that. I think that they can be very successful for weight loss.
Yeah, yeah.
But overall, in terms of good health, we're missing buckets of nutrients.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. You're being very fair to it, which I'm hearing. I appreciate that it's the restriction and that approach is going to be successful in terms of weight loss. But I really appreciate you mentioning that that's maybe not the healthiest, all around best route for total nutrition. And, which is why I meant I mentioned the supplementation approach if you're going to go down that route of cutting out an entire food group. Very cool.
Yeah.
So we've touched on a couple of different approaches and your thoughts on them, and I really appreciate you diving into those. I know a lot of people are going to do some research after hearing what we just discussed, but I want to move into some of the mindset shifts and some of the reasons specifically that people come to a place like New Terrain and what the turning points are in their lives that make them finally go, okay, I need help. I need to go and find someone to help me turn things around. So in your experience, what are some of those turning points?
The most common turning point right now is a health crisis. So they visit a doctor and they are pre-diabetic or they're diabetic and looking at daily insulin, or they've got a high blood pressure, they've had a heart attack. So definitely a health crisis. And this scares me a little bit, Sam, because what I see is that we've normalized being overweight. Mm-hmm. It's become a norm. 2 out of 3 are overweight, and that's okay. And it became really clear to me earlier in the week. I was shopping for boots. And you're able now, so I'm talking about women's boots that are fall, that got little, heels on them, and they come up to just under your knee. Yeah. You are now able to find pretty easily wide calf boots. And I thought to myself, wow, like that's normal now.
Wide calf boots. I had not heard or seen these before. Interesting.
Yeah, but it's quite normal. And so as I was reading the reviews for different boots, people are quite openly discussing, that they love that they're wide calf boots, and it's just kind of the way that it is. Rather than talking about fitting into a normal size boot, we're delighted that we can find wide calf boots.
That's a really good point. I completely understand from a business perspective why you'd want to make something available that is obviously in demand. You just reminded me of a recent interview where my guest said when he had his transformation, and I think this individual lost 190 pounds specifically, he lost like half a shoe size to a full shoe size with that transformation. You just reminded me of that with this wide calf boot concept I hadn't heard about before. That's really interesting.
It's unfortunate in that because it's a health crisis that's the prompter sometimes. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, people could be living much more healthfully and a long time before it reaches that point.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I've heard some stories recently that were pretty scary from, what the potential outcome could have been. And scarier yet, which you just reminded me of, is sometimes these are in the cases of like 20, people in their 20s, people in their early 30s. I mean, your life's just starting and you're already dealing with, type 2 diabetes or, extremely high blood pressure and having to have, a whole routine of meds to deal with it. Like that's so young to be dealing with that. And that wasn't the case, right? 40, 50 years ago. It's such a scary direction we're going in.
Right.
So, let's start down the path of what those turnarounds look like and some of the realistic things to be expected when someone starts making that turn in the road and going down a healthier path. So in your experience, Angela, what are some of the biggest challenges that someone faces when they're first starting a new lifestyle or a new plan?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge is that people want fast results. And unfortunately, as we've been talking about, fast results aren't always the most sustainable results. Yeah. And so it's important to think about It's important to cultivate a healthy relationship with the scale and to think about what success really looks like. And I think often we think about weight loss being the goal. And so as long as the number on the scale is going down, we're successful, as opposed to thinking about what our true motivators are. So do we want to be able to, travel without a seatbelt extender? Do we want to be able to play with our grandkids on the floor? Do we want to be able to shop in a regular size store, regular size clothes? What are the true motivators? Why do we want to accomplish this? And if we can shift that line of thinking, I think that we set ourselves up for greater success.
That's really interesting. So I agree completely. I think that focusing on the process and the lifestyle and, just like you said, the behavior driven changes as opposed to a goal are always going to be more successful. So what are some of the dangers of going the other route where you entirely focus on the scale or on a goal weight instead of the overall long-term process?
We don't always control what the scale does. And so we might be doing everything correctly, and our body might not lose at the same rate all of the time. So you might lose a little bit more quickly on the front end, right? You're losing some water weight. Yeah. Maybe you're really motivated with your eating. And then as you kind of settle in, maybe your rate of loss slows down a bit. But if your success is measured by the scale, and the scale only, then that could be deemed unsuccessful.
Yeah. In my experience, that's been an early point where unfortunately people start, crossing their arms and saying, okay, this isn't working. I'm going to quit. Right. And it's so early in the process.
Well, and it sets up a relationship with the scale where your self-esteem, how you feel about yourself, is driven by that number. I wrote a blog post about a week ago, and it was about this topic specifically. And it was because I had met a woman recently, and she had just moved to Colorado. She was from the Washington, D.C. area and had retired. So she moved to Colorado to be closer to her family. She had lost 75 pounds before she had moved here. So she knew herself fairly well. Okay. And when she came to see me, she had gained back 20 of the 75 pounds.
Oh, wow.
So anyone who's been in that position knows that is devastating, right? And she assured me her behaviors hadn't changed. She knew how to lose weight, and nothing had changed. And of course, I did not know her that well. And I'm thinking in my mind, man, she's had two pretty big changes in her life. She's recently retired, and she's moved to a different state. Certainly something in her routine is contributing to this change, and she just isn't realizing it. Yeah. So we worked through, she had begun hiking. Was she and her hiking buddies overeating the trail mix? She was doing some more family functions, where some of those family traditions creeping into her style. And 4 weeks later, so jump ahead 4 weeks. 4 weeks later, she came to me and she was thrilled. She had been to visit her doctor, and she had stepped on the scale in her doctor's office, and it showed the number she wanted it to show. And it turns out, amazingly, her scale at home was broken. She had a digital scale and it was broken. No kidding. True story. But the power of that scale, the power of her seeing that number, she believed she had put on 20 pounds. Her clothes were still fitting. Her body had not changed one iota, but she felt horrible for 4 weeks. Wow. Driven by the number.
Yeah. Yeah, it's such a mental thing. And you really quickly mentioned something there too, is that her clothes fit better, but she ignored that obvious physical sign that it was working and was focused on the number on the scale instead.
Yeah.
Oh, it's such a mental thing. And that, you're right. That obsession with the number can be debilitating for some people. It can be paralyzing. Wow.
Yeah. Weight loss should really be the outcome. So the motivator should be behavior driven, and weight loss is just the outcome.
We've mentioned behavior driven a couple of times here. So let's dive into that a little bit more, Angela, because I think for someone listening at home who is getting the message and wants to start going down that path, let's dive into some of the practical how-to elements of making that change. So from a behavior driven standpoint and going for long-term lifestyle change, what are some of the critical elements of changing lifestyle and those behaviors and those habits to go down a healthier path?
So one of the first things that I would encourage your listeners to do is to think about what a healthy person looks like to them. And so what does a healthy person look like in terms of their sleep, in terms of their portions, in terms of the types of food they eat, in terms of their cooking, in terms of their activity? What does a healthy person look like? And to really flesh out that vision first. In the end, all of those things need to get done, but they don't all need to get done at once. But we do need, it's helpful to have a vision of what that looks like to you. So it's easy for me to say a healthy person predominantly cooks at home, right?
Right.
That might not be true for someone who's a consultant and travels, 3.5 weeks of the month.
Yeah.
And so for everyone, they need to decide what that is going to look like for them. So, for example, for that business consultant, one of a healthy person in their mind might know how to navigate a restaurant menu really well, and that might be a priority behavior.
Yeah. So we mentioned a couple of things there: sleep, portion size, diet and meal choices, cooking and activity. So for you personally, let's dive into a little bit. What is for you personally the most critical of those, or what is it for you that you focus on the most out of, those, for example, and how do you fit that into your life?
I think the element that I work the most is learning to identify my true physical hunger versus the other reasons that I might choose to eat.
Mm.
And so the easiest way for me, the easiest way for me to manage that is to check in with myself right before I eat and right after I eat. And on a scale of 1 to 10, call this a satiety scale, 1 being starving, double fisting, whatever's eye level in the pantry, to 10 being Thanksgiving Day stuff, I try to keep my hunger at a level of 4 to 6.
Mm-hmm.
And once I'm managing my physical hunger, so keep in mind, I've been at this a while, so I'm fairly good at managing my physical hunger. But once you're managing that physical hunger, then it's a lot easier to explore the other reasons that I eat. And for me, my weight was driven by a lot of emotional eating. And so I wasn't eating because I was hungry. I was eating because I was bored. I was eating because I was overwhelmed. I was eating for a lot of reasons, but not always because I was hungry.
That's really interesting. That's, I think, a really timely tip also as we're going into, like you said, sugar season, right? And going into the holidays here is checking in with oneself on how hungry you really are. I like the 1 to 10 scale and kind of setting your target in there for what is acceptable for every person. I really like that concept. I think a lot of people would benefit from checking in with themselves and kind of rating that as they sit down for meals, especially this time of year. Very cool. That's a great tip.
Yeah, thanks. It sounds really simplistic, but once you start paying attention to yourself, then it becomes less about the structure of eating. So, for example, some folks will say, I like to eat 3 squares a day, and other folks will say, nope, I have 5 mini meals for me, right?
Yeah.
And we forget that it's really about whether we're physically hungry. And so sometimes you might have a breakfast that holds you, and you don't need that snack mid-morning.
Yeah.
You're fine. Sometimes you might have a lighter breakfast, and by 10 a.m. you say, man, I better have a snack, or when I hit lunch, I'm going to be, ravenous at a 2 on the satiety scale.
Yeah.
But you're very conscious of whether it's about hunger or not hunger.
Very interesting. So I want to transition into a success story that you have personally observed and kind of the details of how they got into that position in the first place and the change. And so if you can, share with us one of your favorite client success stories.
I am a big fan of small successes, and I'm a big fan of celebrating the small successes. Mm-hmm. And so I recently received a card from one of my clients, and when I was working with them, it was a couple, a husband and wife. The wife was the one communicating. When I was working with them, they were struggling with some of the small changes because you don't realize how much they add up. So, for example, one of the recommendations was for them to put a fruit bowl on their table. And a fruit bowl on a table makes the fruit visual. And so does it mean that you'll always eat all of the fruits in the bowl? Perhaps not, perhaps not. However, is there a better shot of you eating more fruit if there's a fruit bowl on the table? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And when they said, so she's done wonderful. She's lost, I think, 35 to 40 pounds maybe.
Right on.
And I just got this lovely card in the mail from her, and she included a picture of a fruit bowl that she had just bought. and it was interesting because I've been working with her for months, and up until this point, no fruit bowl. No fruit bowl, no fruit bowl, no fruit bowl. And it took just seeing the right fruit bowl at the right time to say, oh, I love this fruit bowl, and making that part of her home.
Yeah.
And so the success stories where it's fun to say, oh, I worked with a client and they've lost 100 pounds. I worked with a client, they've lost 20 pounds. It's easy to focus on the weight loss outcome of success, but I like to focus on the little things that say, man, as an outcome, her husband is grabbing fruit on the go. That's a lifetime change.
Yeah. I love it. That's a great habit. And I think it's a small indicator of a much larger shift, right? A fantastic move into a healthier lifestyle and that whole territory where they're making healthier choices.
Yeah.
Very cool. Thanks for sharing that, Angela.
You're welcome.
I want to transition now into some of the actionable advice that we have, and maybe resources to help listeners out there who are listening to this and are hearing things that resonate with them right now and really like your message, Angela. So for someone out there who's, maybe where you were 12 years ago, 60 pounds heavier, and, didn't believe that they could get to where you are today and to where many of your clients are today. If you met someone today who is 50 pounds overweight, has never worked out, has never cooked a meal in their life, but has that fire starting to burn inside them, that they want to lose weight, they're determined, what is one thing you would suggest them today to start getting started down a healthier path?
I think, it's hard to say just one, right? It's hard to say just one. I think I would have them take that motivation that they have and somehow create a visual around that. Because when you talk about long-term success, one of the key weight loss skills that's required in my mind is resilience, right?
Yeah.
Because we're not always going to get it right. And there will be weeks where the number goes up instead of down, or weeks when you just feel like you're not making any progress with the behaviors you're working on. And so resilience is important. And one of the things that helps build resilience is to know that motivation. And so when someone's got that motivation and they're excited about it, to be able to visualize that somehow.
So let's expand on that a little bit. What are some how-to ways to do that?
I like the idea of an image that shows something they want to do. So that they're working towards something that they want to be able to do.
I like that.
And whether they put themselves in that image or, there's all kinds of ways to be creative. But not only a healthy fit body. So not only pulling a picture out of a magazine that's a healthy fit body, but a healthy fit body that's playing golf, or a healthy fit body that is traveling or playing with grandkids, or whatever represents what you want to be able to do.
I like that. I think that ties back well to what you said about envisioning kind of the healthy person image every individual has for themselves. And it's an overall thing, right? What kind of things they love to do or they want to be able to do that maybe they can't as a result of their weight.
Mm-hmm. The other thing that's helpful, I think, like as we're talking out loud about getting started, when you're in that motivated stage, prioritizing those behaviors, so you've kind of crafted what what a healthy person looks like. Mm-hmm. There are some behaviors that impact the scale more than others. And there's lots of ways to prioritize what gets done first, right? So it could be an easy behavior that you choose. It could be one that's the most impactful to your weight loss. It could be one that just happens to fit in with the timing of where you're at in your life. Mm. There's lots of ways to go about it. But when you're in that motivated stage, tackling one of the tough ones first might be beneficial. One of the ones that impacts your weight the most. Yeah.
Kind of seeing early success or hitting a milestone sooner helps create more momentum to keep going to the other things, right?
Exactly.
I like that.
Exactly.
Yeah. I think I'm personally one of those personalities that likes to have an easy win, and then it's like, okay, first step is out of the way. That helps propel me on to the next harder thing. I like that.
Yeah.
Very cool. So Angela, you've given us some really, really good insights today into the work that you do at New Terrain and how it's personally been fulfilling to you, and some of the insights into what clients have experienced there and in your experience. Now, what are some helpful resources that you could recommend to Tips of the Scale listeners today? Are there any websites, apps, videos, books, anything out there that you could point people toward to learn more or get more educated?
You bet. There are, as you know, numerous weight loss resources in the market. But because I like to think about behaviors and specific behaviors you're working on, when I think about resources to me are anything that supports that behavior that you're working on changing. Mm-hmm. So a couple of my favorites. If you're working on becoming more active, I love the Fitbit technology. Mm. What I like about it is that it really helps you become more intuitive about how active you are throughout the day. And because we are, as a society, less active than we ever have been, right?
Yeah.
During our normal day, I think it's important for us to get a handle on what feels like more activity throughout the day. So I love the Fitbit for that reason. If you are tackling emotional eating as one of your behaviors, anything by Janine Ross, she's wonderful, very insightful. Portion control, Susan Alberts does a nice job with mindful eating. If you are working on becoming a better, healthier cook, Cooking Light is one of my favorites. Your online tool is great.
Right on.
Yeah, if your listeners would like to see the satiety scale, I'm happy to share that with them. They can email us at info@new-terrain.com, and I will email out a satiety scale.
That's very cool. That's a fantastic list. I was scribbling away here, and I know our listeners will be doing the same, but I will link up all these in the show notes for this episode so our listeners can go and check those out. And I would certainly recommend checking out new-terrain.com as well. A lot of really great info there. I believe you keep a blog on there, and there's some more background on your story as well and how New Terrain came to be. So very cool. Thank you for sharing those, Angela.
You are welcome. Thank you for having me, Sam.
I appreciate it. And so as we're wrapping up here, I like to close with one of my personal favorite questions, and that's because this helps me get an insight into kind of your mindset and how you get in the zone for workouts. So the question is, Angela, for you personally, what are songs that get you really fired up for your workouts?
I laughed when I thought about this question, Sam, because I'm a runner and I don't run with any music at all.
That's blasphemy, right?
Oh man. Yeah, I actually, I don't. I use that time as kind of a way to flush out whatever I'm thinking and whatever's on my mind. Mm-hmm. And so running is also meditative space for me.
Yeah.
And I encourage your listeners to think about that as well. Weight loss efforts take time. And when you think about your life, we're all fairly busy people. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it's important to combine efforts and think about how you're going to make this work long term. Mm-hmm. And so whether you're combining your physical activity efforts with social efforts, so you're running with friends, mm-hmm. for example, or for me, I'm combining, some meditative time with running. You could combine social time with cooking. It's important to make it work time-wise as well.
Yeah.
So I wish I had I wish I had a dazzling song for you, but I don't.
And that's absolutely fine. I think a lot of people could actually relate to this. And that's, I have a lot of good friends who refer to their running time as their introspective time. And it sounds like you use that as kind of a productive flushing out what's going on with you and planning things out in your head and really digesting stuff. And I think that's a very healthy thing to do. Not only is it productive, but, there are a number of health benefits to meditation. And if that's the time that helps you get in the zone, makes total sense. I mean, you're alone in most cases and you're at a steady pace. And if you're focusing on your breathing as you should be while you're running anyway, then you're kind of in the right headspace to really reflect on some things. It makes total sense.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Thanks for giving me the pass.
I mean, just like with diet and exercise, right? There's no one thing that works for everyone. So that time and that, introspective period when you're working out is very different for everybody in their heads. So I think you're speaking for a lot of people today who are in that same kind of zone where, instead of a beat, there's just what's going on in your head and what you're planning and thinking about.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yeah. You just got to find what works.
Absolutely. So, Angela, we've covered a lot of really fantastic material today. And again, I want to thank you so much for carving out time for Tips of the Scale from your busy schedule. So as we wrap up here, do you have a parting thought you'd like to share with Tips of the Scale, and then perhaps share how listeners can reach out to you, and then we'll say goodbye?
You bet. My parting thought would be this. I'd like to challenge your listeners to think about where they're really at. So have they been struggling with their weight for a long time? And if so, I'd like them to think about their past approaches. Were they all or nothing, on or off? If you had tried a different approach, if you had tried small cumulative change and had been making these small cumulative changes for however long you struggled with your weight, the past year, the past 5 years, maybe 10 years, would you be further along today? You are the CEO of you, and as the CEO, you get to choose your strategy. And so I would challenge you to think about what strategies you've been employing, and is it time for a different approach?
I love it. Some powerful advice there. And back to the you are the CEO of you approach. I like that mindset. Very cool.
Yeah.
So how can Tips of the Scale listeners get in touch with you, Angela?
I would invite them to check out our website. You mentioned it at u-terrain.com. They are always welcome to reach out to me personally. My email link is on the site, or they can call us at 303-515-0861.
Right on. I will link all that up on the show notes for this episode at tipsofthescale.com. And I know you'll have some people checking it out and diving into more of what New-Terrain does. Very cool. So Angela, again, thank you so much for spending this time with us. From everyone here at Tips of the Scale, thank you, thank you, thank you. And you have a fantastic rest of your day.
It has been my pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity, Sam.
And there we have it, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us today on Tips of the Scale. Head on over to tipsofthescale.com for recaps of every show, links to all the helpful resources mentioned, and more. Here's to your weight loss success.